Zach Harper, once a rodeo legend, was humiliated in front of the whole town and sold off at a charity auction as a broken cowboy no one wanted. The crowd mocked him, whispering about his downfall and treating his life like it was beyond saving. But fate made a bold move when a pregnant widow, Megan, raised her hand and changed everything. Just wait until you hear the shocking turn this story takes and why justice, in the end, didn't let go. The summer air in Pine Creek was thick with dust and anticipation. The county fairgrounds had never seen such a crowd. Laughter and idle chatter bounced off the wooden walls of the auction barn, mingling with the scent of hay and old timber. Megan Carter stood in the back, one hand resting protectively on her swelling belly. The fabric of her faded blue dress clung to her legs as she shifted nervously. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. This wasn't her world anymore, not since James, her husband, had died in that accident 6 months ago, leaving her with a mortgage she couldn't pay and a future that felt as fragile as the peeling paint on their farmhouse. She told herself she was here for the charity event, that's all, to show support, maybe bid on a basket of baked goods or a handcrafted quilt. But deep down, a part of her craved distraction, a reason to feel something other than the dull, crushing ache in her chest. The auctioneer's voice rose above the murmurs. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, our special lot of the night. Pine Creek's own bull rider, Zach Harper. The room hushed as a tall man stepped onto the small platform. Even from the back, Megan could see he didn't move like a man eager for applause. His shoulders were broad, but his posture was weighed down, as if carrying a burden no one else could see. His boots scuffed the floor as he walked, his hat pulled low to shield his face. A few women in the crowd whispered, their voices laced with pity and derision. "Didn't think we'd ever see him again," one said. "He used to be the pride of the rodeo. Now look at him." Megan caught her breath when he lifted his head. Zach Harper's eyes were striking, not for their color, a sharp steel gray, but for the emptiness in them. There was no light, no fight, just a hollow, guarded expression that spoke of someone who had lost too much, too fast. "Let's start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer called. A laugh rippled through the audience. Someone in the front shouted, "50? He ain't worth 5. Another voice added, "Who'd want a washed-up cowboy?" "Maybe he can fix fences if he's sober enough." Zach didn't flinch at the words. He stood still, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on a spot in the distance. Megan felt a hot rush of anger rise in her chest. She didn't know this man. She'd only heard whispers about the accident that ended his career and the woman who'd left him afterward. But something about the scene felt wrong. She knew humiliation when she saw it. She'd felt it herself when neighbors spoke behind her back after James died, when they looked at her belly and shook their heads like she'd made some mistake just by surviving. Before she realized what she was doing, her hand shot up. 100, she said, her voice clear and steady. The room fell silent. Heads turned. A few people gawked. The auctioneer blinked, then smiled broadly. "We have a bid, $100. Do I hear 150? No one spoke. Zach's eyes finally moved. He searched the crowd until they locked with hers. Megan's breath hitched. For a split second, she thought she saw something flicker there. Surprise, maybe even anger. But it was gone as quickly as it came. He gave no nod, no smile, just a long, unreadable stare. "Sold for $100 to the lady in the back," the auctioneer announced, bringing his gavel down with a sharp crack. The sound jolted Megan from her daze. What had she done? She didn't need this complication in her life. A stranger with a shattered past wasn't part of her plan. But as Zach stepped down from the platform and walked toward her, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were both about to step into something neither of them expected. Something messy, something dangerous, and maybe, just maybe, something that could save them both. The old farmhouse creaked in protest as Zach stepped onto the front porch. The place was a shadow of its former self, paint peeling, wood warped from years of storms. It matched his mood perfectly. Megan stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. She looked small but unyielding, like a lone tree refusing to bend under the wind. Her eyes studied him, wary, yet determined. "You're late," she said. He let out a low breath, more of a sigh than a response. "Didn't realize you were keeping time. Thought you bought me, not rented me by the hour." The jab made her jaw tighten. But instead of snapping back, she stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. "I didn't buy you," she said. "I gave you a chance. There's a difference." The words hung between them like a challenge. Zach brushed past her, his boots heavy on the worn floorboards. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood, but there was a hollowness to it, like no one had truly lived here for a long time. "So," he said, setting his hat on the table, "what's the plan, boss?" She ignored the sarcasm. "There's a leaky roof, rotting steps, and the barn door won't stay on its hinges. I can pay you for 2 weeks' work. After that—" She hesitated, her hand unconsciously resting on her belly. "After that, I don't know." He followed her gaze, his expression hardening for a moment as it fell on her pregnancy. "You sure this is a good idea?" he asked. "Yeah, hiring someone like me?" "Someone like you?" she repeated. He gave a humorless smile. "A washed-up cowboy with nothing left to lose. You really think I'm the guy to fix what's broken?" She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "I think you know more about fixing broken things than you want to admit." For a second, his mask slipped. There was a flash of something raw, anger, regret, maybe even pain. But then it was gone, replaced by the familiar indifference. Fine," he said, "but don't say I didn't warn you." Megan didn't reply. She simply handed him a toolbox and turned away, unwilling to let him see how her hands trembled. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. It felt like a storm was coming. The days in Pine Creek settled into an uneasy rhythm. Every morning, Zach arrived at the farmhouse with his sleeves rolled up and his guarded silence in place. He worked hard, harder than Megan expected, hammering loose boards, repairing the sagging porch, even clearing the overgrown path to the barn. But when the tools were down, the quiet grew heavy. Megan often watched him from the kitchen window as he hauled lumber across the yard. His movements were precise but tense, like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. She could see the lines etched deep into his face, the kind that came from years of holding back words too heavy to speak. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she brought him a glass of lemonade. He was kneeling by the steps, fixing the last of the loose planks. "Thought you might want a break," she said softly. He looked up, sweat clinging to his brow. For a fleeting moment, something shifted in his eyes, an almost imperceptible softening, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Thanks," he muttered, taking the glass. She hesitated before sitting on the edge of the porch, her hands folded over her belly. The air between them felt charged, yet fragile. "You don't talk much," she said finally. He gave a dry laugh, staring into the glass. "Not much worth saying." "That's not true." Zach glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Why are you really here, Megan?" he asked, his voice low but edged with something darker. "This house? This project? Is it about fixing the house or fixing me?" The question caught her off guard. She looked away, fingers tightening on her dress. "Maybe both," she admitted after a pause. "But mostly, I'm trying to prove I can stand on my own 2 feet again. For the baby," he let out a slow breath. "That's more than I ever managed." There was a weight in his words that drew her eyes back to his face. His gaze was distant now, fixed on some memory she couldn't see. "You had someone once, didn't you?" she asked gently. His jaw tightened. "I did. And I lost her. Because I couldn't be the man she needed." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with unspoken understanding. Megan reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his forearm. He stiffened at her touch but didn't pull away. "Maybe you're still becoming that man," she said softly. Zach's eyes met hers then, and for the first time, there was no mask, no walls, just raw, unguarded pain. And in that shared moment, something fragile and unspoken began to form between them. A storm was gathering outside, but neither of them moved, as if afraid to break the delicate thread that now tied their hearts together. The wind howled through the valley, rattling the windows of Megan's farmhouse like restless spirits demanding entry. Outside, dark clouds roiled across the sky, promising a storm fierce enough to test even the strongest structures. Zach was on the roof when the first drops of rain began to fall. "Come down, Zach," Megan called from below, her voice straining to carry over the rising wind. She stood in the yard, clutching her shawl around her shoulders, her heart thudding in her chest as she watched him brace against the gale. "I said I'd fix this roof, and I meant it," he shouted back without looking down. She felt a surge of frustration and fear. "This isn't worth your life." His hammer struck the wood with a sharp crack, a sound that was almost drowned out by the thunder rumbling above them. "It's not about the roof," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for her to hear. Megan's breath caught. She didn't know what he meant, but she knew she couldn't let him keep pushing like this. She moved to the base of the ladder, her voice trembling. "Zach, please. If not for yourself, then for me. For this baby." There was a long pause. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through her dress and chilling her to the bone. Finally, he looked down at her. His face was streaked with rain and something else. Pain, raw and unfiltered. "I couldn't protect the ones I loved before," he said, his voice breaking. "I have to make this right. Just once." A sudden gust sent a loose shingle skidding off the roof. Megan gasped as it crashed to the ground beside her. "Zach!" she cried, her heart in her throat. He froze, then cursed under his breath and began his descent. Each step down the ladder felt like an eternity. When he finally reached the ground, Megan ran to him, her hands gripping his soaked shirt. "You could have fallen," she said, her voice shaking with anger and relief. "I didn't," he said simply. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, all the walls between them crumbled. "You don't have to prove anything," she whispered. "Not to me." He stared at her, rain dripping from his hair, his chest heaving. And then, as if drawn by some force neither could fight, his hands cupped her face. The kiss that followed wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a collision of pain and longing, and the unspoken truth that both of them had tried so hard to bury. When they finally pulled apart, they stood in the rain, breathless. "I'm no good for you, Megan," he said hoarsely. "I'm broken." She shook her head, her hands still clinging to his shirt. "Then let's be broken together." For a moment, the storm around them seemed to fade into silence, and for the first time in years, Zach Harper allowed himself to hope. Spring had settled gently over Pine Creek, bringing with it the scent of wildflowers and the soft murmur of new leaves stirring in the breeze. The farmhouse, once a crumbling relic of loss, now stood proudly on the hill. Fresh paint gleamed in the sunlight, the porch no longer sagged, and the barn doors opened without a sound. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home. Megan stood on the porch, cradling her newborn son in her arms. His tiny fingers curled around hers as he slept, unaware of the journey that had brought them all here. Zach was sitting on the steps below, elbows resting on his knees, staring out at the horizon. The old cowboy hat lay beside him, forgotten. His hands that had once built fences and wrangled bulls, now rested still, as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with them. "You're quiet today," Megan said softly, easing herself down to sit beside him. He glanced at her, a small, almost shy smile tugging at his lips. "Just thinking," he admitted. "About?" He looked back at the fields, where sunlight danced across the tall grass. "About how I almost didn't make it here," he said. "How I thought I was too far gone to ever matter to anyone again." Megan reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You matter," she said simply. "To me. To him." Zach looked at the sleeping baby, his gray eyes softening in a way Megan had never seen before. He reached out hesitantly, as if afraid to break the fragile piece, and let his rough fingers brush the child's tiny cheek. "He doesn't even know who I am," he whispered. "You're the man who fixed this house when everyone else said it was beyond saving," Megan said gently. "You're the man who stayed when it was easier to run. And you're the man who holds my heart, even if you don't believe you deserve it." Zach's breath caught. For years, he'd carried the weight of his failures like chains, convinced he had nothing left to give. But here, on this porch, with a woman who saw past his scars and a child who represented a second chance, he felt something break loose. It wasn't the kind of breaking that destroyed, it was the kind that set a man free. He turned to Megan, his voice low but steady. "I'm not perfect, Megan. I'll mess up. I'll fall short." "Then we'll figure it out together," she said. For the first time in years, Zach Harper smiled. Not the guarded, half-hearted smirk he'd worn like armor, but a real smile. It felt strange on his face, but it felt right. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of golden rose, Megan leaned her head on his shoulder. Their son stirred slightly in her arms, but settled again with a contented sigh. In that moment, Zach realized something he never thought possible. He wasn't the shattered cowboy anymore. He was a man reborn, not because he'd fixed all his broken pieces, but because someone had seen him as whole all along.